2022, uh, Megan and I were in London, and we decided to worship at Westminster meeting. Um, and I remember going in, and then the people that were at a desk explaining like there's a lot of silence in the meeting in case if I wasn't Quaker, that sort of thing, and said, "Oh yeah, we know, we know." So we went there and we had a lovely time, a lovely time of worship and silence. And I also remember there being uh, at that meeting, people had brought their dogs with them and they were quiet. I didn't know that there was a dog in there until uh, one of kind of the clicks. There was a wooden floor and there was some clicking from the dog's nails on the floor. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's dogs in here. That's so cool. Well, one of the outcomes of that, after once our meeting for worship broke, was Wendy approached me and said, "Hey, you're American, and I think I know you, or we're friends on Facebook or something." And I said, "Oh yeah, I know your name. I just never met you." And that's often the case, nowadays. You can go years without actually meeting someone that you have an online digital association with. And so we had a lovely time of tea and kind of conversation afterwards. And then since then, me and Wendy have always kind of shared some shared space, and I've got to see from a distance Wendy's journeys back to the United States to her home meeting in Baltimore, and her recent graduation with her doctorate. And Wendy, good job. I'm still getting there. And so it was just serendipitous, just kind of meetings, ongoing meetings with Wendy. And then even this past June, we got to connect with Wendy because she was here for Sierra Cascades yearly meeting as a visiting friend, and that was another good meeting time. But Wendy Cooler is a member of Sandy Spring Monthly Meeting, the Religious Society of Friends, and has been engaged in public ministry under their care since May of 2019. Uh, a little bit about her. The ministry for her began with a call to right relationship around interpersonal violence. Currently, the larger call is to right relationship with the Religious Society of Friends regarding an identification, support, and nurture of public ministers, and that's everyone. Right relationship is the term that Quaker public minister John Woolman used in the 18th century, and today it is often used to describe a simplified, truthful, and respectful relationship with the natural world, the economic world, and our relationship with the divine. Wendy's ministry with friends is a larger call to right relationship in the world, a call that is provided by and informed by the Spirit. Taking an excerpt there from her Sandy Spring monthly meetings traveling minute. And we're just so excited to have you here with us yet again, digitally. I wish you were able to be here in person, but this is just as good as we're able to see you and to hear you out and to listen in and listen in about the things that Spirit has laid upon you and that you're passionate about. So thank you and welcome to Reedwood Forum. Wendy, you're welcome and among friends here.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. Um, Hold on, I'm going to click something on my screen there. Um, you can probably see me better than I can see myself. I'm probably gigantic right now. I feel like the Wizard of Oz, when I'm being projected into a room. I think the fire, gives a particularly good effect. Um, yeah, I told Mark that I would open my remarks today by explaining why I have a weird name, because he was hitting on it already. So I have a weird name. I know I do. And yeah, I am pronouncing my name correctly. Sometimes people in the Northeast ask me if I mean Wendy when I say my name is Wendy. And I say, no, I am pronouncing my own name correctly, friend. Thank you. Um, and um, my mother named me this. I didn't name myself this, which often is surprising to people. So I was born in 1976. I was a bicentennial baby. Um, and I was a weird kid, and actually thought that I was born in 1776 when I was told about being a bicentennial baby. And so when adults would ask me how old I was, I would say, I don't know, but I'm much older than you. Um, which with the weird name made an impression, I'm sure. But my mother, so in 1976, it was apparently common practice to use something called twilight sleep when women gave birth. And my mother gave birth under the influence of this drug, which makes it look like you're conscious, but you're only sort of semi-conscious. It was some kind of pain relief scheme that was popular in the late 70s. And while she was still under the influence of this drug, they asked her what she wanted to name me, and she remembered that she really liked the song by the Association. Everyone knows it's Wendy. Um, and then, hilariously, a few years later, she married a man whose last name was Cooler, and he adopted me. And so my name became forevermore Wendy Cooler, with a rude Geneva in the middle, which is a grandmother's name. So my name is Wendy, old-fashioned Geneva Cooler. And I guess I chose this name in the sense that I have not chosen to change it. And here we are. So I'm here to talk to you about my work in support of public ministry. And in particular, this project that I am convening called the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. It does have a website, and hopefully, Mark can send that website out because we will be looking to work with meetings like Reedwood in our fellowship program next year, pending some funding to allow us to do that. Um, so I have a pretty windy tale of public ministry, and I've considered, what it is I want to share with you. Do I want to talk to you about how to interact with the Friends Incubator? Do I want to talk to you about my sort of spiritual journey as a public minister, or some of both? And I think I want to do a little bit of both. But I think I really want to focus on sort of my spiritual journey as a public minister, and see how that resonates with friends at Reedwood, and see if there is a call tugging at your heart, that you would like to share with other people in your meeting. So I was first called into public ministry about 14 years ago. I have to recount the years every now and again. I'm not terribly good at math, actually. But about 14 years ago, I was experiencing domestic violence. In a marriage that whose context was in uh, a meeting. So we were both members of a monthly meeting. We had become Quakers together. We were not born Quakers. My first community of belonging was the Assembly of God. And I had left the Assembly of God as a young teenager, rather dramatically, actually. I began to pray for God to forgive Satan, and that didn't go over very well amongst Pentecostals. Um, I began to do that out of a misunderstanding, a theological misunderstanding, that I think my pastor had and then passed on to me. I essentially asked my pastor how it could be that there was evil in the world when God was all powerful and all good and all knowing. And my pastor said, "Well, Wendy, It is because Satan has angered God, and Satan is roaming the world causing evil things to happen. And I had been taught to forgive my enemies and not to hold on to my anger. And I was a deeply religious child. And so, of course, I took what my pastor said to its logical conclusion, which is Satan must be forgiven. Um, and I expected that I was going to be able to reason with God and God would forgive Satan. This is what the Jewish tradition would call chutzpah. Um, and certainly in the tradition of arguing with God. And so my prayer life really centered around arguing with God about the presence of evil in the world that I had been told was a consequence of Satan's work because he was here and not in heaven with God. Um, Exorcism is something that can happen in Pentecostal circles. It did not happen to me. They were just befuddled with me and did everything they possibly could to get me to stop praying for God to forgive Satan. And the more they tried, the more I was determined that this was the answer, and the more alienated I became from my community of belonging until I just stopped considering myself a Christian altogether by the time I was about 14 years old. And my grandmother got me. She was a Methodist. I went to Methodist church for a while, but I was not engaged. And something of that religious feeling stayed with me, um, though I was really angry. And I classified my anger as disbelief, but it was anger. It was a wound that had not been repaired. Um, and I began to feel that wound repaired when I discovered Quakerism as a young adult. I had a baby young, and began going to Quaker meeting in my early 20s with that child, and with my then husband. So we became members together. He had been raised Catholic, and the marriage was profoundly abusive, but I didn't recognize it as abuse. Um, and by the time I recognized it as abuse, it was pretty bad. And I knew that I couldn't talk to my meeting about it. I somehow intuited that it was not okay what I was experiencing, not okay to talk about at meeting, that it would make me not belong. And so I tried to resolve things on my own. We went to therapy. I was very proud of myself for the quiet way in which I handled things. Um, but ultimately, when we did separate, the abuse really intensified, and I needed to go to my meeting for help. And they were profoundly unhelpful, and in fact asked me to leave when I disclosed this to them, though I was a beloved member of meeting who taught first day school. Um, and this was because they said they were just unprepared um, to deal with the consequences of domestic violence. That Quaker meetings are places that are not responsible, in fact, for confronting domestic violence. And I took that as the truth, just like I had taken my pastor's explanation for why there was evil in the world as the truth. Um, and I left this time without so much chutzpah. And my ability to argue with God, in this case, the God inside of each of us, the divine light inside of each of us, was suddenly reignited when other women from my yearly meeting, from Baltimore yearly meeting, began to disclose to me as some kind of misguided pastoral care their own experiences of partner abuse or sexual violence. And I became very angry. Who I was as a young teenager and who I was as an adult now with two children became some kind of unified whole. And I began to talk about the presence of interpersonal violence in our yearly meeting. 12 years ago, I met a woman who became my elder in the ministry. I met her the same day I met the man I'm married to today. I did not like him, but I did like her on that day. Um, and that's a whole other story, how I became married to Eric. I'm nothing if not entertaining. I'm just a great big goob in the world. Um, but this woman, Joan Liversidge, took me aside and was very curious about me. And after listening to me for a while, she said, "You're a public minister." And I said, "No." I'd never heard of such a thing. So I'm from the liberal tradition, which is often allergic to any talk of ministry. Sometimes in the liberal tradition, we'll say, we're all ministers, but what we really mean is none of us are ministers. It's a, get out of ministry card or something to say that we're all ministers. There's something ironic about the way that we use language in that way. And so I think that this is something we don't have in common with your tradition, with the pastored tradition. I don't expect that you're allergic to the idea that one might be called into full-time ministry. Um, but this question of public ministry is something I do want to explore with you. As as cousins in this faith. Um, so she told me out of public ministry, and she said, this is what the earliest Quakers were, Wendy. George Fox was a public minister. Margaret Fell was a public minister. They were ministering in public. That's what they were doing. Um, and that up until, 100 years ago, there were rich traditions, even inside of liberal Quakerism, or unprogrammed Quakerism, that provided support and accountability structures for calls. And she was like, "You have a call and you're acting on that call. You're a public minister." And she was like, "I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that those support and accountability structures become available to your ministry." So Joan took what I was called to do more seriously, I think, than I did. I was doing the work, but I really didn't see it as being part of my work for the meeting. It was sort of like coming out of my own sense of alienation, I think, originally, that I mistook my rage for some kind of justice. And I was speaking from that rage and that alienation until Joan found me and dusted me off and said, "No, this call is integrated with our community. This call should be integrated into our community. This is our ministry together." So that is how I came to be minuted in 2019 by Sandy Spring, and 2018, the year before that, by the yearly meeting. I am embraced by the yearly meeting and my monthly meeting as a minister. Um, Baltimore Yearly Meeting does not record. We did away with the language of recording about 40 years ago, and I think I may be the only person who has been formally embraced by the yearly meeting or by the monthly meeting in that 40-year period of time. So these practices that we wrote them down and we forgot about them. And I think that the purpose of writing them down might have been to forget about them. It was so we didn't record, and we sort of changed what we call it, and then by doing that, we sort of had the labor, and then sort of laid down the whole practice. So we sort of codified something in order to lay it down, is what it feels like. Because of this allergy we have, we think, oh, well, none of us are more important than anyone else, as if by being called into a ministry on interpersonal violence, I was applying to be the Quaker Pope. Uh, and there's still this misunderstanding inside of liberal Quakerism, that when you have a full-time call in public like this, as opposed to a call to make coffee on Sunday morning, which is vital. I need coffee on Sunday
Amen.
morning. Or a call to be on the library committee. Vital, we need books. But these are more sort of internal ministries, internal to the meeting. They're housekeeping for the meeting, and they are absolutely essential. I think they are more essential actually than we give them credit for. We kind of treat our caregivers, in my experience of Quaker community, in much the same way that the world treats caregivers. Mothers are not treated well. Anyone in a caregiving position vocationally is not treated well in the larger culture. And we don't treat our internal ministers as if they are ministers who are providing something sacred for all of us. So it probably should come as no surprise to me, even though it does surprise me still, that we also don't. Really make an effort to kind of see, support, and hold accountable those of us who are called into public facing ministry, in the liberal tradition, I will say, which is like the realm in which I feel, some expertise, and I feel curiosity, I think, about your tradition and where we have things in common, and where maybe we diverge. But again, I think, we are cousins, and I suspect that there might be some similarities in some places where we might work together. Um, so I traveled for 12 years in that ministry. And since 2018, with a minute of embrace and a variety of different travel minutes over those years. My most recent one is from 2024, and I'm up for another one, I think, as the ministry continues to evolve. Um, but that minute was just a piece of paper. Um, it was almost like, again, like we codified something so we could ignore it. It, I was told, we were all told that I was a minister traveling under the care of the yearly meeting and then the monthly meeting, but I was under no one's care in reality. It was just a piece of paper. Um, I I am surprised that no one has come back to tell me that some of my ministry was harmful. My ministry involved working with survivors. And I am not a therapist, and no one was supervising me. Even if I had been a therapist, someone should have been supervising that work. And because my yearly meeting and monthly meeting did not see a way forward to sort of hold the ministry accountable, take the ministry as seriously as it deserved, there was no accountability structure. I could have been an abusive person traveling the United States and Europe, talking to survivors of interpersonal violence, at worst case. And at best case, I could just make innocent errors. Um, as far as I know, the only person I harmed was myself, though. And I did myself a great deal of harm by traveling like that without supervision and without adequate support, because I now carry hundreds of stories of Quaker survivors, people in our community who have been gravely injured by other members of our community. And I can't process those stories with you. I don't have an appropriate group of people with which to process those stories because that was never part of my agreement with those survivors, and it should have always been. So I see great danger in not taking our recording processes seriously, or our embracing processes, whatever we call them. And it's not about becoming the Quaker Pope. It's about holding ourselves as communities of people who do, in fact, love each other, to the standards of behavior that love demands of us. Um, and in addition to that, accountability piece, there is the support piece. Um, Never once in the last 12 years have I been able to support myself while working full time and with having, a ministry that was really in demand. If most people know my name, hilarious as it is, It is from this work around interpersonal violence. I was on Quaker Speak a few times. I write for Friends Journal. I've traveled extensively. I had more requests for my time than I could give, particularly without sufficient material or spiritual resources. Um, and I think I came very close to burning out. And I realized in about 2022, about the same time that I met Mark, which was like during the phase where I was sort of working on my final project um, around interpersonal violence before laying that part of my ministry call down, that I was a liar and a hypocrite in relationship to my meeting. And I think for the first time in the series of stories that I am telling you, I found the God inside of me to argue with. Not the external God, the daddy in the sky that I imagined as a child who should make all things right and not allow evil in the world. Not the God that was in someone else that I was upset with because, they had not found their way clear to addressing interpersonal violence that was affecting our families. But I found the divine inside myself and began to ask myself why I had allowed myself to be outside of right relationship with my community. And I just did not like I did not like the stories that I heard from myself. I did not like my own testimony. And I felt called to go back home and labor with my community. And so that's what I did. And I started with Joan. And I told Joan that I was a liar and a hypocrite, and that I needed to labor with the meeting. And at first, she wanted to protect me from myself, I think, and the way that I saw myself in the divine light. But it was the truth. And there was no harm in telling ourselves the truth. Um, and so I did go back and labor with my meeting. And I was for the first time again, like in this like humility. I was going to let them tell me no. I was going to let them tell me, actually, Wendy, we don't embrace this ministry. Um, and that's not what they told me when I went back to them and began to labor with them. And so we've been laboring together for 3 years now, in real sincerity on the question of not only my call, but the meeting's relationship to outward facing ministries and the necessity for support and accountability structures at the meeting level. And from that and from partnerships that came out of, the relationships that I built over, 12 years of traveling in the ministry, and the relationships I have with other public ministers, um, we developed this Friends Incubator for public ministry. And so that's the institutional piece that I want to tell you a little bit about, but I feel like it's almost like the least interesting thing I have to say. Um, so the Friends Incubator is both 3 years old and 6 months old. It sort of depends on where you start its inception. It's had money for 6 months. It's had a name since 6 months, but it's had an advisory board for 2 years while it was in formation, and it was a series of events that had no sort of sponsor. They did have sponsors like French General Conference or Quaker Leadership Center, for instance, sponsored events that I was sort of organizing for them. But the incubator did not exist as a thing with a name. It was just sort of me doing stuff for Quaker organizations and serving as something of an organizer and facilitator for other ministers coming forward and talking about our experiences. um, 6 months ago and attempting to labor with our meetings and with the Religious Society of Friends. And 6 months ago, we received a shoemaker grant. And with that grant, we established the first cohort of 5 public ministers, their elders, and their meetings. And right now we're working on the East Coast. Um, and when we opened up applications for the fellowship, which have since closed, but when we opened up applications for the fellowship, I genuinely thought we might get 12 applicants and I would know all of them, and a third of them would be completely insane. And I thought, like this is going to be easy, like people will self-select for this. Um, and we got almost 60 applicants for those 5 spots. And they were fantastic. They're all fantastic. I wish we had the resources to do fellowship with all of them. Um, about 30 of them were from the East Coast and therefore eligible. And one of the eligibility requirements is that we're not just working with the minister, but we're also working with an elder that their meeting has approved, and we're also working with the meeting. And so, in this way, the incubator has a very different model than other leadership programs that have existed in the Quaker world that sort of take the minister out of their context, and work on their skills and their discernment, um, but are doing nothing to increase capacity back home with that minister. The assumption in many of our leadership programs is that our meetings are just not places of spiritual vitality and maturity, and that we can't trust our meetings with public ministry, the nurture and accountability that is necessary for public ministry to flourish. And not only do I not believe that, and actually find that to be incredibly counterproductive to the whole Quaker experiment. I mean, if we can't trust our meetings, what are we even doing? I saw Judy Maurer. I don't know if Johann is there or not, but Johann Maurer said in one of our events, that the question for him is, are we building a trustworthy church? And I hold that in my heart every day. Are we building a trustworthy church? And if we aren't, what are we doing? And we just can't start from, I don't trust you. That is a belief that leads to a divorce in a marriage. And I don't want to be divorced from Quakers. There is nowhere else for me to go. My husband, who I met on the same day I met Joan and learned to not only like but love. Um, as a traumatized person, was once asking him tearfully early in our marriage why he was such a good caregiver to me. Um, and I was just feeling very self-conscious. And he said, "Well, you're mine to love, and you're mine to love. Like we are each other's to love, and there doesn't need to be any other reason. There doesn't need to be any virtue that causes me to love you. You don't need to earn my love." But that said, love is also a verb. That we love each other in the way that we behave towards each other, in the way we lift each other up. And I think that that is what the promise of public ministry calls us into. Um, I think we don't do a particularly good job of honoring the private ministries, the inward facing ministries of coffee making and library tending and child tending, and all the things that we do in community. And that is a tragedy. And it is a tragedy also. It is a very related tragedy when we don't look for the spiritual gifts in each other, in the calls and the concerns that take each other outside of our meetings into the public world to change the world together and not alone. So I would definitely say that, Mark, your pastor, is a public minister. Um, he's both, I guess. Like a pastor is maybe like sort of a inward facing minister and an outward facing minister. Um, and I'm curious about what other kinds of public ministries are bubbling up in the hearts of people at Reedwood. What are you called to do in the world? I heard from Mark about some of the messages that came up, concerns that came up during meeting for worship. Um, the world is scary, and you're in Portland. The world is scary with frogs. Like, how are we lifting each other up? How are we linking arms to live in to the light and to the experiment that is our shared Quakerism? I think that's all I have to share. And I would really welcome, um, I would like to stay in kind of a spirit of worship, I think. But I would really welcome testimony and questions from those that have come.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And we do want to uh, honor what Wendy is uh, suggesting and in a spirit of worship, responding to Wendy's story and framing of public ministry. Um, and but not to complicate things too much, we do want to end on the top of the hour, or if not, a little bit before, because this room is to be used by waiting to come in. But we have a good 10 to 12 minutes here. So let's go ahead and in that spirit of worship, and if anyone feels moved here to ask a question or make a statement about public ministry or anything that Wendy shared, please feel free to do so.
Paul. Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Paul Anderson here. It's
Hello,
good to be
Paul. It's so
nice
good
to
to see you
go.
again.
Yeah, and thanks for your good work. I've served on the Board of Leadership Development in Northwest Shirley Meeting for many years. And of course, when somebody gets put into the recording process, well, we look at their education, look at their call, and we recommend having a seminary education or something equivalent so that especially if it's a lifelong calling, then getting a good education is going to help that ministry go better. Question, we don't know the answer to this, but if Elias Hicks had had a good theological education, might we have avoided the Hicksite splits?
Well, that's a special interest of mine, Paul.
What you
You
think?
know that? Do you want me to try to answer that?
Part of the background is that in 1827, this is for other people here, 1827, Elias Hicks, who was a public minister coming from Long Island there in New York, and very popular, a lot of good wisdom, but he kind of morphed into transcendentalism and deism as opposed to, solid theology. But he also was respected by friends, and many really loved his public ministry. So at Philadelphia Early Meeting, he was eldered by the elders Philadelphia Early Meeting, and he said, well, in that case, he went and held meetings elsewhere, which caused a split then. And then you have him traveling around the Midwest and the Northeast, and so 5 different yearly meetings split around whether they liked Hicks or whether they were more orthodox. So that's kind of the background of what happened. The splits were 1827 and 1828. So yeah, Wendy, what do you think?
Oh, that's such a whole can of worms. So Tom Ham and I have this argument all the time. I am very interested in the Hicksite Orthodox split, and I don't want to like delve into like a history lecture, and be obnoxious to people, but I would love to talk about this more with you. I think it's debatable actually how much theology had to do with the split. There were other things going on, and I do think Elias Hicks was a jerk, actually. And I think that, his personality and the way that he had relationships with people, really contributed to the split. And also, I think that, you may have heard me or other people say this before. People like to say that Quakers are conflict averse, and I don't think that's true. I think we're repair averse, that we have conflicts. This is an example. Like we tore our world down in the 1820s and 30s, because we were not equipped to repair our relationships with each other. And so, in a way, it's almost irrelevant to my way of thinking whether there was like a theological, a sincere sort of theological difference that somehow resulted in our burning the world down. We burnt our world down. We hurt each other. Like at the time, we were literally related to each other because we couldn't marry outside of the faith. It was horrendous. It was like our civil war. It was so bad. And when I look at that thing that's called it's like the Quaker family tree. It's not a family tree. This is, it's a map of all the times we've split away from each other. And I also feel like, this is Wendy personally talking. I kind of feel like there's value too in the splits and in the clarity around when we disagree with each other. And so I both find these splits tragic and I find them, you know, I don't know, clarifying sometimes. And I really wish that, the people of Hicks's time and the people of our time were better equipped to do the repair work, that, follows such clarity. Because I think we are called to love each other, and it's very hard to love each other when we refuse to repair our relationships, even when we disagree about very important things. Um, and then there was sort of a second part to your question, or sort of an implied question there about theological education. Like, would Hicks have benefited from that? I loved seminary. So my doctorate is in ministry. I'm a demon, which is the best of all possible. Um, degrees. Um, and I went to Earlham School of Religion for my master's, and it was my seminary experience in both seminaries I attended, um, was completely transformative to my spirit. So much spiritual formation happened in the context of seminary, and I recommend seminary all the time. Do I think that seminary is necessary? I don't know if this was your question, but maybe it was. I'll opine a little bit longer, Paul. So, is seminary education necessary to be responsible, as a public minister? Um, I don't know. Um, I think that, education, yes, education is important. And I think that we need to do a better job as Quakers at basic religious education, that we should know our history. We should know the sacred texts of our tradition. We should know, we should know about theology. We should be able to have these kinds of conversations with each other. I don't know if seminary is, the only way or the best way, to do that, particularly in a community where we are all ministers and we all need to be prepared to be ministers in each other's lives, unless we're all prepared to go to seminary, which I don't think is probably true. So I don't know. I love seminary. And I think that there are perhaps ways we can engage in popular education that could serve us alongside maintaining our seminaries. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there are lots of ways of getting there. Thank you.
Hmm. Hmm. There's Judy's head again.
Hazel, go ahead.
I don't know if this is exactly relevant, but, or like the kind of questions that you were hoping for or whatever. But I was wondering, like, when you go into a meeting and you do what you do with survivors, like uh, how you deal with the abuser, how you deal with the like the person perpetuating the abuse, and like, do you then ostracize them from the community? Do you find another community for them to go to? Uh, how do you do that from a lens of God or a savior who calls us to forgive and not see people as disposable, but also protecting people and protecting survivor safety? I don't know. It's a complicated thing, and if that isn't a kind of, yeah, whatever. Curious.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Your name is Hazel? Thank you, Hazel. That is such a profoundly important question. And I feel like I can't pretend to answer that question in the next 6 minutes. Um, I The question you're asking, so I do want to clarify that I no longer do work around interpersonal violence, that it is not my primary call to ministry anymore. That would be in the past tense, that work. But I would be very happy to talk to you more if that's something you're struggling with. Um, and I think that it's important. I think it's important for us to to not be subject to mm, the way that the world has taught us to see things. I think that what is absolutely essential as we engage in questions around interpersonal violence is to engage in them from a place of curiosity. Um, And, what do I mean by curiosity? I don't mean um, sort of the Oprah style curiosity, like, why did this person abuse this other person? What the psychoanalytic, sort of method of understanding that. What I mean is a much greater curiosity than I think that we have experience with in the culture that we were born into. Um, and I don't, I don't, I think that the wisdom that I've come to is that I don't have a list of rules. I don't have policy suggestions anymore. It was one of the reasons why I sort of laid that ministry down is that increasingly people would come to me because they wanted some kind of policy expert who could tell them, 1 through 10, what do you do to prevent abuse or at least prevent the meeting from being sued because of the abuse. Um, and and then, how do you like the focus is so often on the person who committed the abuse too. Um, and I don't know, and I suspect it is not the case that to be a survivor-oriented community, we need to discard perpetrators of abuse. But I also think that starting from any assumption about what is to be done um, at this point in our spiritual maturity is to start from the place that, whatever the most powerful voices tell us is the truth. Which is a weird, I'm giving you the weirdest answer, Hazel, because it's such a complicated question. It's such a tender place. And I feel like I would encourage you if you're really, if you're concerned about interpersonal violence, to enter into discernment inside of your community about your relationship to interpersonal violence. Because I think that there's wisdom inside each of our communities when we give ourselves the space to discover it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
So I want to honor our time here, and I love that phrase that you said, Wendy, about we're not conflict avoidant, but we're Quakers are not conflict avoidant, but we're what,
Repair.
we're repair avoidant. And what came to mind was just this weekend, the King of England prayed at the Vatican with Pope Leo, and just what a picture of repair,
Mm-hmm.
attempts of forgiveness, reconciliation, unity. Add all the words that we like and use in our meetings and institutions. So just kind of just a thought there. Thank you so much, Wendy, for your wisdom, your story, and for just opening up a conversation that naturally it's hard to get around to. What you brought up as far as how is the meeting caring for those that serve it, and how do we care for those that have a heart that has been given to them by Spirit to care for those who have either yet to come into the meeting or will never step foot in the meeting. But how do we care for one another and serve one another and wash one another's feet? I think Reedwood has some positive new growth, and that's a growing edge for Reedwood presently right now. But you brought in, for me, you brought to the forefront of my mind of how in this time of growth, how can we care for one another? How could we be each other's cheerleaders and supporters and biggest fans?
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much for bringing that into this conversation and to this meeting. You're a gift. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mark. I was really honored to be asked to be here this afternoon. And, I'm a big fan of yours and several other people at Reedwood that I could name.
Well, we look with hope and anticipation at what God is going to continue to do through you. And with this group of lucky 5, I was thrilled. I was curious about how many people applied. He said 60. I said, "Oh my word!" And may blessing be upon that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, friends. Well, we're going to go ahead and dismiss in peace. And Wendy, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday afternoon. May it be restful. Thank you so much, dear friend.
I've been watching it more off and on. Would you like to write?
Thank you.
Okay.
But thank you both.
Sure.
No, I don't live that far.
Okay.
Would
Well, I
it be a
figured-
farther drive to the drop off?
Oh, good. Good, it's good to listen to her. I've heard about her, I've never met her, I've heard of her. Oh, one. Yeah. Yeah.